In this video series, I will provide perspective, historical fact, and critical analyses of the current political landscape that gave cause for the resurgence of the American government, as we are taking the needed steps to restore our lawful government here in America. I will present to you how it is being done. The Federation of States has secured and offers to you your rightful claim to your inheritance as an American. And we ask that you join your fellow American state nationals in the work of finishing the reconstruction of our constitutionally guaranteed Republican form of government. Welcome back, America and the world, to today's episode of the Resurgence Post Report. I am your host, Louise Campbell Anthony, with the Peacekeeping Task Force for the Federation of States, that is, the United States of America Unincorporated. Today's episode is part 2 to my previous episode 4, titled Follow the Money. In that episode, I left you with a cliffhanger. I posed a question. What happened to the silver? Do you remember? Let me replay the clip for you and provide you with the answer to that question so I can set the perspective for this episode. Watch this.
While the mainstream media was busy talking about holiday shopping and celebrity gossip, the most significant financial event of the decade took place in the dark plumbing of the U.S. banking system. Late Friday night, after the markets closed and the public turned off their screens, the Federal Reserve's emergency discount window saw a spike in activity that we haven't seen since the 2008 collapse. We have confirmed reports that over $25 billion in emergency liquidity was injected directly into the balance sheets of the major bullion banks. Why? Because the silver squeeze broke them. The vertical move to $85 didn't just hurt their pride, it vaporized their capital. They faced a margin call they couldn't meet, and instead of letting the free market liquidate them, the Fed stepped in to print them a lifeline. It is official. The bailout has begun. The Federal Reserve promised they were fighting inflation. They promised they were shrinking their balance sheet. They lied. This $25 billion injection is shadow QE. It is money printing by another name. They call it temporary liquidity swaps or bank term funding. But let's call it what it is. Inflation. They're creating currency out of thin air to fill the black hole created by JP Morgan's bad bets on silver. Every dollar they print to save the banks dilutes the value of the dollars in your pocket. You are paying for their bailout through the destruction of your purchasing power. The inflation you see at the grocery store next month will be the direct result of the button they pressed last night. We must address the elephant in the room. JP Morgan is the custodian of the silver market, but they are also the biggest short seller. It is a conflict of interest that would be illegal in any honest system. When silver gapped up this week, JP Morgan's short positions went deeply underwater. The losses are estimated to be in the tens of billions. Under normal rules, a brokerage would force them to liquidate, to buy back the silver at any price. But JP Morgan is too big to fail. If they are forced to buy silver on the open market, the price would go to $500 overnight, and the bank would collapse. So the Fed gave them cash to keep the position open. They are using taxpayer money to suppress the price of the people's money. For those who don't know, the discount window is the lender of last resort. Banks only go there when they are desperate. It carries a stigma. If a bank borrows from the window, it tells the market, we are broke. Nobody else will lend to us. The fact that usage spiked to $25 billion indicates a systemic heart attack. The interbank lending market has frozen. Banks don't trust each other anymore because they don't know who is holding the toxic silver shorts. They know someone is about to blow up, and they don't want to be the one holding the bag. The credit crunch has arrived, and it was triggered by a shiny gray metal. One bank now owns the market. One bank controls more silver than your government. They hold more silver than the entire COMEX exchange. They possess more metal than most nations could ever dream of acquiring. For 15 years, they built this position in the shadows. While they were stacking bars in their vaults, they told you silver was a relic. They told you gold was the only haven. They told you to keep your cash in a savings account earning 0 interest. They were buying. You were sleeping. But the game has changed. They have just flipped the switch. They are no longer betting against the price of silver. They are betting everything that the price is about to explode. 750 million ounces. That is the size of their position. It is an exposure so massive it threatens to break the global financial system. The question is not if the price will move. The question is, did you miss the boat, or is there still time to get on board? This is the hidden economy. You need to understand the scale of the deception. It starts with a simple Google search. Take out your phone. Right now, search for JP Morgan Silver Fine 2020. Look at the number, $920 million. That is almost $1 billion. It is the largest fine ever paid by a bank for rigging precious metals. They got caught red-handed manipulating the price of silver. They admitted to it, they paid the money, and then nothing happened. Most people think $1 billion fine stops the crime. It did not. They kept their silver. They kept their trading desks open. They kept buying more. Now they own more silver than any private entity in the history of the human race. Think about that. A bank gets caught fixing the price of a market, pays a fee to the government, and then turns around and corners that same market. Nobody on the news is talking about this. To understand why this is happening today, we have to go back to the origin. We have to go back to the moment the trap was set. The year was 2008, the financial crisis. The world was ending. Banks were collapsing. People were losing their homes, and Wall Street was in panic mode. One of the biggest banks, Bear Stearns, was about to die. But Bear Stearns had a dirty secret buried in their books. They held the largest short position in silver history. Let me explain what a short is. It is a bet that the price will go down. If the price of silver went up, Bear Stearns would lose billions. They were betting the house that silver would crash. When Bear Stearns failed, someone had to clean up the mess. Someone had to take their bad bets. JP Morgan stepped in. They bought Bear Stearns for pennies on the dollar. But when they bought the bank, they inherited that massive bet against silver. Now put yourself in their shoes. You are JP Morgan. You just inherited a massive bet that silver prices will drop. If silver rallies, you lose money. Most banks would panic. Most banks would try to close the bet and run away. JP Morgan did the opposite. They played the long game. They played a game that took 15 years to finish. They kept the short position. They used it as a weapon. They used those paper contracts to smash the price of silver down. Every time silver tried to rise, they sold paper contracts to kill the momentum. This kept the price artificially low. Why would they do that? Because while they were selling paper with their left hand, they were buying real, physical silver with their right hand. This is the key. They suppressed the price so they could buy the physical metal at a discount. For 15 years, they rinsed and repeated this cycle. Price goes up, smash it down with paper. Price goes down, buy the real bars for cheap. This is not a theory. This is a matter of public record. That $1 billion fine proves it. They were spoofing the market. They were placing fake orders to scare other traders. But the fine was just the cost of doing business. It was a fee to build the monopoly. Now look at the hoard they built. The numbers are terrifying. In 2012, JP Morgan had less than 5 million ounces of silver. That is nothing. It is a rounding error. By 2015, they had 50 million ounces. By 2019, they had 150 million. Then the acceleration started. By 2024, 500 million. As we look at January 2026, the number sits at 750 million ounces. In just the last 6 weeks, they added another 21 million ounces to the pile. To put that in perspective, they bought more silver in 6 weeks than many countries hold in their entire national reserves. But here is the number that should scare you. 750 million ounces sounds like a lot, but you need to compare it to the real world to understand the power they now hold. Every silver mine on planet Earth, from Mexico to Peru to China, combined produces about 830 million ounces a year. That is the total global production. JP Morgan alone holds almost 1 full year of global supply. If every mine on Earth shut down tomorrow, if every shovel stopped digging, JP Morgan could supply the entire world for a year from their own private vault. Look at the COMEX exchange. This is where the price of silver is supposedly set. The COMEX currently has 32 million ounces of silver available for delivery. That is the public inventory. JP Morgan has 23 times more silver than the entire exchange. Look at London, the LBMA, the biggest market in the world. They have about 790 million ounces. JP Morgan alone has almost as much silver as the entire London market. They have become the market. They are the whale. And when the whale moves, the ocean shakes. One bank. This is not a country. This is not a sovereign government. This is one private bank.
Do you see the con game and the mind manipulation going on here? They injected $25 billion of Federal Reserve notes, fiat paper IOU promises, into the economy to pacify you, while they continue to maintain control over 750 million ounces of your silver. It's not theirs. Why? So they can maintain the leverage over you, over what you can do and even what you can say about it. America, if we keep wheeling and dealing and renegotiating with these criminals, we will forever live as corporate feudal slaves. We can't allow corporate criminals to simply pay fines and continue with their con games. We can't make concessions anymore. Now they are caught again, but it's not by accident. This is all planned. You have been thrown the bait. Remember, that they all knew that fiat currency systems only have a limited lifespan. So going into this game in 1913, they knew how it worked. Our fiduciary for the United States of America Unincorporated, Anna Maria Riezinger, has noticed America and the world in her article 4839, and I quote, "It has been the plan for the bankers, military schemers to crash the Federal Reserve and blame it on us for 50 years. It is their habit to crash their own banks. Listen and repeat. It is their habit to crash their own banks. As anti-intuitive as this is how they cheat you and yours. They crash their own banks, set up new banks, and skate right on with the same old criminals in control. That is what the QFS system is, their replacement for the Federal Reserve System," unquote. Not this time, America. We didn't take the bait. We got our ticket out. Our fiduciary has made plans. Now, are you ready to hear the better side of this story? Let's get into part 2. None of the corporations, including the banks, have paid anything at all toward any bill or charge whatsoever since the Federal Reserve System began in 1913. That's how they have run up such a horrendous U.S. national debt. They, not us. In order to pay for something, you have to have actual asset-backed money to pay it with. Nobody has been able to pay a debt with money in this country unless they individually undertook to do so using the remaining United States silver dollars since 1913. That means that everything, absolutely everything, that the commercial banks in this country have promoted for 112 years is trading in the equivalent of casino chips, having no value or validity outside the casino. And if you use fantasy money, you also create fantasy debt. As a result, the banks have no position on anything. They never owned the assets that they borrowed against. They never owned the credit generated from the assets either. They never paid anything at all. And as their own paperwork fully establishes, they were lien holders pretending to work for the victims of this outrageous scam. So enough of the mind games. Nobody is falling for it anymore. I want to provide you with proof of what we are claiming here. Let me read a portion of this 1968 court case tried in Scott County, Minnesota, in an American common law court, not one of these administrative military courts we've been subjected to in our communities today. The 1968 Credit River decision was a Minnesota justice court case where Judge Martin Mahoney ruled a bank's mortgage void, claiming the creation of money through bookkeeping entries lacked lawful consideration. It argued that the Federal Reserve System was unconstitutional. Let me read it. So here's the case. First National Bank of Montgomery, plaintiff, versus Jerome Daly, defendant, the judgment and decree. The jury of talesmen were called, impaneled, and sworn to try the issue in this case. Lawrence V. Morgan was the only witness called for plaintiff, and defendant testified as the only witness in his own behalf. Plaintiff brought this as a common law action for the recovery of the possession of Lot 19, Fairview Beach, Scott County, Minnesota. Plaintiff claimed title to the real property in question by foreclosure of a note and mortgage deed dated May 8, 1964, which plaintiff claimed was in default at the time foreclosure proceedings were started. Defendant appeared and answered that the plaintiff created the money and credit upon its own books by bookkeeping entry as the consideration for the note and mortgage of May 8, 1964, and alleged failure of consideration for the mortgage deed and alleged that the sheriff's sale passed no title to plaintiff. Now, Mr. Morgan for the bank admitted that all of the money or credit which was used as a consideration was created upon their books. that this was standard banking practice exercised by their bank in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, another private bank. Further, that he knew of no United States statute or law that gave the plaintiff the authority to do this. So, what was the finding? Now, therefore, by virtue of the authority vested in me, pursuant to the Declaration of Independence, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the Constitution of the United States, and the Constitution and laws of the state of Minnesota, not inconsistent therewith, it is hereby ordered, adjudged, and decreed, 1, that plaintiff is not entitled to recover the possession of Lot 19, Fairview Beach, Scott County, Minnesota, according to the plat thereof on file in the Register of Deeds office. 2, that because of failure of a lawful consideration, the note and mortgage deed, May 8, 1964, are null and void. You can look up First National Bank versus Jerome Daley case of 1968. This court concluded on the public record that the First National Bank of Montgomery didn't loan Jerome Daley anything of value so as to obtain any valid interest in his property. These private Federal Reserve banks are fraudulent, so the bank had to release to Jerome Daley his home. It wasn't theirs, it was his. The bank gave no consideration toward the loan. Daley's credit paid for it. Back in the 1990s, it was a group of inquiring minds who wanted to know, with information, analysis, and research, trying to make sense of what they were observing. How did our country get into this mess? And they were seeing that things didn't really match up. They were told this and then that, and it was very confusing. The researchers were like detectives, each one going down a rabbit hole and bringing it back to discussion to try to figure out how to piece everything together. It was akin to a scientific research group. One of the elderly researchers died. He had brought together quite a number of researchers in his lifetime, both here in America and in other countries. He was actually British. He had quite a team of researchers, historians, legal experts, and others who were working on these issues and problems, researching American, British, and other history. But he died suddenly, and the rest of them were left wondering, what are we going to do with our leader gone? Our fiduciary and late hereditary head of state was among them. Realizing that the problem with our civil government administration at the federal level here in our country was within the Roman pontificate and its administration, they went straight to the top because lower authorities would only defer to the Pope. It does no good in a compartmentalized hierarchy to attack low-level employees. They can do nothing and change nothing. One of them said, well, we have enough evidence that the Pope and the British King are at the bottom of this dog pile, so let's go to Rome. 900 of them paved the way for a delegation to go see the Pope, though not all 900 went. The first delegation met with the then Pope Benedict XVI and various officials within the church and came back with an understanding that we Americans were right in terms of our interpretation, and the Brits were right about the Norman settlement. It was kind of like a guessing game from childhood. If you get it right, they have to tell you. But if you get it wrong, they just pull a face and let you go on searching. We got affirmation that yes, we were right about our history. And yes, there was original jurisdiction of the land and soil. And yes, all three federal constitutions were all three different federal subcontractors, and they all related to a different jurisdiction, air, land, or sea. All of those basic things were confirmed by church officials who had access to the records and the knowledge to be able to confirm it. It was affirmation for us that we actually did know what we know. The best part was that they admitted it, and they showed us what their nomenclature was so that we could better interpret what we were reading. We had a couple of experts in Latin and French, and we began looking at this from the standpoint of the church. It's important to look at this from both sides to see how this can be interpreted and how you have agreements and disagreements. But it gives you the basis to be able to talk to somebody and make negotiations possible. So that was our first encounter. All the roads to our particular mysteries as to how our governments were structured and all that leads straight back to Rome. Actually, our first delegation doing the research for this went to Rome in 1998. Another delegation went in 2005, and another in 2008, 2010. When we initially approached Benedict XVI in his sacred ministerial office, we confronted him with the wrongdoing and the profiteering and violence and blackmail and violations of treaties and service contracts being perpetrated by the secular officers of the church operating the municipal United States government and the United States corporation. Pope Benedict XVI was earnestly perplexed, even aghast, and we had the impression that so far as he was concerned, our delegates were like talking horses. And the simple fact that we were talking to him about these subjects were shocking. His response was, "Nobody told me." And he turned away, shaking his head. After some investigation, though, Pope Benedict XVI concluded we were right and began immediate corrective action, for which he was blackmailed and deposed by force. The Pope moved to liquidate the municipal government parent corporation and its many, many franchises in 2008, the Pontifical Government and the Romanus Pontifex Trust, City of Rome Trust, in 2011. Additionally, he attempted to create a new regional system of postmasters to oversee the postal services and use these offices as a means to deliver relief and to devise a correction using the interface of the land and the air jurisdictions. The administration of the post office has always been under the Constitution of the United States of 1790 with the Holy Roman Empire. And since the 1937 Declaration of Interdependence of the governments in the United States, there has been cooperation between the Roman municipal government and the British territorial government subcontractors. Those who desired peace and goodwill among men could enter what he had called the divine providence and reside safely in the air jurisdiction while retaining their beneficial interest in their land and soil assets. It was a simple, practical plan. The funds for it would come from liquidating investments and trusts associated with the office of the Roman Pontiff, which he had planned to dissolve. The post offices would be used to distribute gold-backed money orders to the people who had been harmed, and all would be made whole. If the Roman side of the operation had agreed, it would have worked, but the secular administration, while appearing to go along with the solution, resisted it. Benedict's simple, direct to the victims approach was deemed impractical. Those concerned about liability and admissions of guilt that could be implied were adamant that the church should just buckle down and hold its ground, while undertaking whatever smaller and less damning concessions and corrections that could be made. Benedict, nevertheless, had appointed his first regional postmaster for North America, a man named James Thomas McBride, and had entrusted the seal of St. Peter to him and told him to open up the storehouses of the Lord for the comfort of the living people who were willing to embrace peace and love as a way of life. The only law of the divine providence is to love the Creator and the creation and love your fellow man as yourselves. This has always been sufficient law to guarantee a good and peaceful kingdom, provided that we abide by it. And it is acceptable to all religions, except, of course, Satanism. This is what the actual sacred side of the Roman Catholic Church tried to do. The secular Roman side of the church administration appeared to go along with it, but moved secretly to undermine it. James Thomas McBride was promptly arrested under false pretenses and his home ransacked by the FBI, which seized the seal of St. Peter, upon which the recognition of seats of governments worldwide depends, and refused to return it either to the church or to James Thomas. There is no doubt that Benedict XVI had every right and power to create the new regional postmaster offices and make the other changes and appointments he specified. His decision to open the doors of the divine province, dissolve the office of the Roman pontiff, and dissolve the trust underlying it to fund restitution may have been controversial, but nobody disputed his right to do it. On June 12, 2011, Pope Benedict XVI did dissolve the office of the Roman pontiff. The Romanus Pontifex Trust was officially collapsed and terminated via Writus Mandamus and Writus Probatum. His chosen appointee, Pope Francis, began circling the wagons and divesting the church of embarrassing contracts, precisely as the Romans in the Roman Catholic Church structure had wanted from the beginning. On July 11, 2013, Pope Francis ended the protection of the bar associations worldwide and withdrew the letters of marque, allowing them to act as privateers for the Vatican. Francis issued his motu proprio, disavowing the actions of the bar associations and rescinding the licenses issued under the authority of the Roman pontiff and the Treaty of Verona. This means that as of 2013, there were no valid privateer licenses available to justify any hostile action by the bar associations or British Crown officers against the people of this country. Francis's action was undertaken as part of the dissolution of the office of the Roman pontiff, which was completed by 2015. In America, in 2015, Barack Obama entered the Municipal United States, Inc., all capital letters, parent corporation into bankruptcy with its Roman inferior Sesta KV franchises. Remember, like Joseph Allen Smith, Inc., all capital letters. Confirmed by Pope Francis, who dictated that it should be Chapter 7 involuntary bankruptcy, so that there was no chance to try to resuscitate it, and was intended to be sunsetted and not be restored or reorganized, as they call it. So that means all the intellectual property, the patents, copyrights, everything that was under the municipal government purview now comes back to the next steps down, back to the living people. And let the truth be told, the bankruptcy liquidation process concluded October 1st, 2024, under Biden's administration. And Trump and the White Hats had nothing to do with it. Whether by plan or default, more FBI and agency attacks were directed at James Thomas McBride, which guaranteed that he could not fulfill his mission. He died shortly after he was released from prison. As witnessed by our fiduciary and the late hereditary head of state, when made aware of the misadministration of the municipal United States government, Benedict XVI moved promptly to correct the situation, and he worked out a practical means to deliver relief and assistance to the living people who had been harmed. If it had not been for the mechanics of evil and infirmities of age, Benedict XVI might have succeeded in launching the largest rescue and restitution program in history. And another church officer, James Thomas McBride, devoted his life unto death to carry through with it. Whatever their individual limitations and circumstances were, we have no reason to think that this was anything but a good faith effort on the part of Benedict XVI and James Thomas McBride and those individuals within the church who worked on this initiative. Nonetheless, to this day, the storehouses of the Lord was not opened, and the seal of St. Peter was not returned. America, to make sure you closely follow this story about our visit to the Pope, let me make clear to you, our Jubilee was put into motion in 2008 by Pope Benedict XVI. Restitution was planned via the post office in 2010. But as this story goes, the British Territorial subcontractor and the secular side of the Roman Catholic Church derailed it all. Our American government has always required that those acting on behalf of the public interest operate as fiduciaries or as fiduciary deputies. Remember this graphic from episodes 1 and 2? I told you that we had 6 different presidencies. Well, with that came 6 different Congresses, 3 American and 3 United States Congresses. All 3 American Congresses are populated by elected fiduciary deputies, not trustees. Only the British and the Holy Roman Empire federal subcontractors had trustees. This should give you a clue to the fact that those local community trustee boards running our towns are not American. Also, at the level of the Federation of States in our American government, we have the Office of the Fiduciary. It is our custom and tradition to have fiduciaries and fiduciary deputies, and they who act on behalf of the public interest must act under the prudent man standard. What is the prudent man standard? It simply means that the fiduciary is obligated to act in good faith, to do their best to take care of the public interest, the same way they would take care of their own private property assets. It's a simple, humble concept. We have public assets and private property assets. Each man is responsible for taking care of his own self, his own family, his own house, but we each also have public assets. Someone has to take responsibility for the public assets and the private property assets that somehow wound up in public possession. When this whole mess came to light, our fiduciary was by divine providence in the right place and at the right time to claim back all the property and infrastructure we think of as public assets, and also to save the individual private property assets of the living people. This is why her claims always name herself as fiduciary, acting on behalf of the unincorporated United States of America and naming the living people as the creditors and beneficiaries. She did not act for herself. She acted for her country and her countrymen. And this is what a fiduciary does. They act in good faith to protect the property of the people for the people. We maintain that a government has only one valid purpose: to protect the people and their assets. The fiduciary role may require protecting both at once, and this is what has happened here. The people were in danger of losing both their public and private property assets. So our Federation fiduciary stepped in and claimed it all back for us. Nobody can object to this, as the Federation of States was always the proper authority to do this, and our fiduciary office is the proper officer. Our fiduciary laid claim to all property assets belonging to both the organic states, the public property, and the people, the private property. This has sometimes been misunderstood and misrepresented as an attempt to steal property belonging to individuals instead of preserving their property interests for them. But that is far from the truth. You must observe that all assets within the borders of this country were up for grabs due to the claims that the American government was missing and in interregnum, and due to the long-planned fraud schemes misrepresenting Americans as British subjects and municipal citizens of the United States. So our fiduciary claimed it all back, both public and private, and thereby raised an objection to the idea that our country was vacant and without a government, and also to the false presumption that the people were stateless and had to adopt some form of foreign citizenship as British subjects or Roman municipal citizens of the United States. When our hereditary head of state summoned the states of the Union into session and administered a process to rebut these false claims of foreign citizenships that obscured the identity of the American people as heirs to this country, this opened up a pathway for the people to duly expatriate from any presumption of foreign citizenship and assemble their state assemblies. In so doing, the public infrastructure and material interests and rights were saved. It was at this time that the wheels were set into motion to begin a process of reclamation for each American to receive back their private property interests, their land patents, their homes, their businesses, their good names, their records, their freedom, their money, set free of foreign public trust interest claims. As we describe it, imagine a mountain of mittens piled up on the floor of the local school gymnasium. It's the responsibility of the people to come forward and claim their own mittens out of the pile. The fiduciary did her duty by claiming all the private property back and preserving it. But the individual people have to step forward and claim back your private assets on a one-by-one basis. We call this correcting your birthright political status. It's a process of reclaiming your inheritance as an American, being born on one of the states of the Union or naturalized to one of them. You do this by correcting the public record that now falsely identifies you as a foreign citizen, with publishing a simple one-page declaration backed up by 2 credible witness statements who can testify to your identity. All the native nations as well who have been subjected to this same foreign territorial and municipal citizenships also have the same avenue available to them to return to their proper political status as Americans, while having your cultural heritage recognized and preserved. Completing this process identifies you as an American state national who is owed the release of your property from any foreign state-of-state trust or claim. It also marks you as one of the people and not a foreign person, and identifies you as one of those who are owed all the protections and guarantees of the federal constitutions. It sets you free of the foreign taxation and licensing and most statutory laws, unless you voluntarily and knowingly choose to engage in federally regulated activities or enter a federal facility like a post office or a naval base. These substantial benefits have been preserved for you, along with your identity as an American, by the timely and determined actions of our fiduciary office. Anna Maria Riezinger was born a Wisconsinite, is the widow of our late hereditary head of state, James Clinton Belcher, and the heir of the St. Germain Family Trust that was donated to underwrite America and America's government. How did she become the fiduciary? By doing the work of a fiduciary. Long ago, Anna claimed all the property and assets belonging to the New World Order factions and the phony corporations serving as governments, and the Queen and the Pope and all the rest of them. Not only did she claim the assets, she claimed the debts, which of course everyone else tried to avoid, but she didn't, recognizing it as her fiduciary duty. From October 11, 2007 through April 11, 2014, for 7 long years, she served them due process. In that time period, about 10,000 pieces of mail went out of Anna's home office at her own expense, informing members of the municipal governments worldwide and the territorial governments too of our objections and research we uncovered to support those objections. In 2014, the American Court of Record issued its findings as the final judgment in civil orders, which everyone can read about in her book titled Disclosure 101. I will put a link to that book in the description below. Before and after the collapse of the Romanus Pontifex by Pope Francis, Anna filed private notices and multiple UCC-1 liens on the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. Department of Defense, E Pluribus Unum Incorporated Corporation, and a whole lot of them, to capture the United States land patents, cadastral surveys, and copyrighted titles to the land and soil they had stolen and assigned it all back to the United States of America unincorporated, the states, and the people. The UCC-1 notice was served on the parent corporation and all the franchises subsumed. This then was followed up with specific secondary notices, amendments, etc. And as this happened, each of the assets and liens placed under her proper name immediately rolled over into her pre-established proper name trust. The trust attached to her proper name was the first thing she had set up. Then she made all the notices and liens attached to her proper name and the proper name of the unincorporated Federation of States, the United States of America, both. The proper name trust is good for 50 years from the date of recording and bridges across from the public to the private. Most of the liens, both the non-UCC and the agricultural liens, are also attached to other trusts, so that, for example, assignment of the land assets was returned to the United States of America, unincorporated, and assignment of the soil assets was returned to the United States, unincorporated. Both unincorporated receivers are owned by the state assemblies. On behalf of each state of the Union, on September 2nd, 2016, Anna filed 50 non-UCC state liens against the bankrupt territorial state-of-state franchise organizations and recorded them in the District 500 UCC Central File. On January 6, 2017, Anna issued a payment bond and lodged it with the Vatican Chancery Bank to redeem the debts of all names, lowercase letters, and names, all capital letters, paid them off, not just in the past, but for the next 1,000 years. Then she followed that up on the same day with posting an indemnity bond with the United States Treasury to cover all 50 states of the Union, and thereby everyone living in the states to indemnify, that is, underwrite the states to do mercantile business, which means international trade, and to insure them against loss. When you operate in trade, that is, business between unincorporated parties, you also need protection, which is provided through an indemnity bond. Anyone now waking up and attempting to pursue liens and claims against these bankrupt corporations will realize that they have no power to set aside her liens, as she has already processed the case against them and entered the divine province. And from this position, Anna has an unalienable power and right to determine the disposition of the assets, including all the so-called national debts. Anna published an irrevocable will to transfer her secured party interest to all Americans into perpetuity upon her death. The irrevocable will contains all the reference numbers to the underlying UCC documents filed in Alaska. When she dies, or if she is killed, the whole ball of wax is immediately subject to her published irrevocable will. All the liens are cured and are served in public record by her subsumed statutory trust as well. Let me bring to your attention that because our fiduciary claimed their debts as well as their assets, she is the majority claimant in every case. Also, let me bring to your attention that as our public unincorporated trusts are the public side inheritors and assigns under her proper name trust, the odious debts resulting from the misapplication of interest payments charged on those national debts are automatically converted to credit owed to the unincorporated lawful trusts of every nation. The corporations accrued and charged these debts against the living people for their private benefit, and the people were left undefended for decades, until now, when all is reversed and the banks are balanced. Thus, when our Federation Fiduciary called for the liquidation of the offending corporations and for their illegal and unlawful patents to be revoked to prevent them from profiting any further from criminal activities, she does so from the position of the private lawful preferential creditor of record and as the lawful fiduciary of the United States of America, unincorporated. There is no need for anyone to scramble around, think that they need to bring forward additional claims in the UCC venue, as everything has been restored to everyone already. When I say everyone, I mean everyone, not just the long-suffering people of the United States. I mean everyone in every country who has suffered the tyranny of the corporations and their false claims in commerce, especially their false claims in admiralty, which allowed the hypothecation of the debt where no debt was possible. It's just a matter of working out the technical issues of returning the purloined assets to their rightful owners, converting the debts into credits, and delivering relief to the declared state nationals of every country. Anna Maria Riezinger is not just America's fiduciary, but also functions in the same capacity with respect to the resources of over 200 nations, so as to expedite repatriation of resources and organize a new financial system and provide for an orderly resumption of public government functions. All legacy and historic and bank trusts all of what you know and think of as off-ledger accounts and as the assets of the World Trust and so on have been administered by trustees acting in our names. We are the donors. The donors, not the trustees, ultimately control all of these trusts, both public and private. All assets belonging to each country and to each of the people living in each country will be returned and fully restored debt-free. Ample credit and underwriting for national currencies will be made available, as well as access to prepaid credit. Ample restoration funds for infrastructure and environmental remediation and enhancement of natural resources will be made available interest-free. Unlike the trustees, who are obligated to penny pinch and make profit their primary objective, the donors are free to extend interest-free credit, engage in true philanthropic enterprises, entertain long-term and visionary investment projects, and take other initiatives that would not be possible for funds managed by custodial institutions and trustees. Let me give you an example of how a fiduciary is obligated under the prudent man standard to handle the assets placed under his or her trust. I'm going to read to you a text message exchange between myself and our Federation fiduciary demonstrating how she takes care of our business. December 12th, 2025, Anna Von Rice, that's her pen name. She texts, I will be traveling at noon today, though I could possibly stop and be available to talk on a phone line. If that would be possible, it would work on my end. Hunter is in the middle of final preparation and is onboarding millions of tons of gold as we speak, so he is not able to attend today. He did say that all that is needed to do asset transfers is standard API to API process. What is most important to me is to be able to affirm that it is our goal, which means knowing the provenance and if it is a trust, the conditions of the trust indenture. We are picking up large quantities of gold that belongs to the American states and people, and that gold is being earmarked according to its provenance and intended purpose. So, for example, gold that was intended to pay pensions for World War II vets and which was never paid to them in life is being earmarked for their sons and daughters. Gold from the Guadalupe Hidalgo Trust that was intended to build infrastructure in the Western states is being earmarked for that purpose. In those cases, we know where the gold came from. Therefore, know it belongs to us. And we have legislation and/or trust indentures, bond offering information, and similar data to show the intended beneficiaries and purposes, which we intend to honor in each case according to what is possible. So that's what we need to know, is provenance and purpose. Transfer of the assets is very simple. Once the paperwork is done, the assets are ledgered into the new bank system as lawful assets. Gold enters via the International Trade Bank portal and is ledgered in the physical assets, ledger in a separate sovereign trust account so it remains identifiable. From there, we close out any encumbrances and the trust management team begins making decisions about deployment. Typically, 1/3 of the corpus is distributed, 1/3 is invested, and 1/3 is hallmarked as coinage or gold reserves as a starting point for deployment, but every case is different. My response, thanks for the details. I will relay it back to the bank and get back to you regarding rescheduling. You see, a fiduciary appropriates the funds according to the specific purpose of the trust indenture or the donors. They do not just deploy funds under their control in any way they see fit, no matter how humanitarian the purpose may seem. You can't spend one nation's money on another nation. That is simply theft, not humanitarian. Anna is the fiduciary for the world and will properly identify the assets that belong to your country and deploy them according to the donor's wishes. The fiat currency collapse has begun. All sectors of the financial system have been breached. Currency, stocks, bonds, commodities, all fudged, all counterfeited, all short sold, all eaten out from within by the central banks and the commercial banks practicing fractional reserve banking, which was patently fraudulent and evil from the start. It's like buying a hamburger and getting a tenth of a hamburger instead. Best estimates are that fiat currency values will decline 50 to 80%. Watch this video on the collapse of the fiat currency and the return to the gold-backed money around the world.
For 55 years, the world has operated on a lie. Since 1971, when Richard Nixon temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, we have lived in a fiat currency experiment. That experiment ended this morning. While the mainstream media was distracted, a consortium of major global economies quietly initiated the first transactions of a new monetary system. This system is not based on debt, it is based on assets. It is not backed by promises, it is backed by metal. The gold standard has officially returned, and with it comes the mathematical certainty of the death of the unbacked US dollar. It's official, is not hyperbole. It is the recognition of a new reality where paper money burns and gold reigns supreme. To understand why this is happening now, you have to look at the debt clock. The United States has printed $36 trillion of debt that can never be repaid in real terms. The rest of the world knows this. They know that the only way the US can pay its bills is by printing more worthless paper. So, the creditors, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, have stopped accepting the paper. They are demanding payment in something tangible. This morning's trade settlement in gold between Shanghai and Dubai marks the end of the petrodollar and the birth of the petrogold era. The dollar has lost its privilege, and America has lost its credit card. This return to hard money is not a choice, it is a necessity. History shows that every fiat currency eventually returns to its intrinsic value, zero. The Roman denarius, the French assignat, the Weimar mark, they all died when the debt became unpayable. The US dollar is at the end of that same life cycle. The central bankers know this. That is why they have been buying gold at record rates for the last 3 years. They were preparing for today. They were dumping their own product, paper money, to buy the competitor's product, gold. They front-ran the collapse of their own system. The mechanics of this new system are simple but revolutionary. Instead of trusting a central bank to manage the money supply is limited by the amount of physical gold in the vault. This imposes discipline. Governments cannot print gold to fund wars or welfare. They have to live within their means. For the politicians in Washington, this is a nightmare. For the saver and the worker, this is liberation. It means your savings cannot be inflated away. It means the money you earn today will buy the same amount of bread in 20 years. Sound money is the foundation of a free society, and freedom just made a comeback. Watch the price of gold in the coming days. The spot price on the COMEX is about to become irrelevant. The real price will be determined by trade settlement. If Saudi Arabia says a barrel of oil is worth 1 gram of gold, then the price of gold in dollars will have to rise to match that ratio. We predict a repricing of gold to $10,000 or even $20,000 an ounce to balance the global balance sheet. The dollar price of gold isn't going up. The value of the dollar is going down to meet the reality of the metal. This shift destroys the exorbitant privilege of the American consumer. For decades, we have exported inflation to the rest of the world. We printed paper and got cheap TVs, cars, and oil in return. Now the world is sending that paper back. As trillions of unwanted dollars flood back into the U.S. economy, we will see hyperinflation on a scale never before witnessed in a developed nation. The standard of living in America is about to collapse to reflect our lack of production and our excess of debt. The party is over and the bill has arrived. The introduction of a gold-backed currency by the BRICS nations is the catalyst. They have created a viable alternative to the dollar. Why would a country hold U.S. debt that yields negative real returns when they can hold a gold-backed bond? The capital flight from the west to the east will accelerate. We are seeing the economic center of gravity shift from New York to Shanghai. The west has financial engineering. The east has the physical gold. In a reset, he who has the gold makes the rules. But it's not just gold, it's silver too. Silver has historically been the people's money. As gold becomes too valuable for daily transactions, silver will resume its role as the medium of exchange for wages and groceries. The return of the gold standard necessitates the return of bimetallism. We expect the gold to silver ratio to crash from 80.1 back to its historical norm of 15:1. This means silver has even more upside potential than gold. Silver is the high-octane fuel of this monetary revolution. The government will try to fight this. They will try to ban the ownership of gold and silver. They will call it hoarding. They will launch their central bank digital currency, CBDC, and try to force you to use it. But a digital token backed by nothing is still fiat currency. It is just a faster way to go broke. The public is waking up. They prefer the weight of metal in their hand to the pixels on a screen. The black market for gold and silver will become the free market, operating outside the control of the state. The impact on the banking system will be fatal. Modern banking relies on fractional reserves, lending out money they don't have. Under a gold standard, banks must have 100% reserves. This means the era of easy credit bubbles and bailouts is over. The too-big-to-fail banks are actually insolvent under a hard money standard. We expect a wave of bank failures as the system purges the bad debt. This is painful but necessary. It is the forest fire that clears the dead wood so new growth can begin. Your retirement account is in the crosshairs. Most pensions are invested in government bonds. Bonds are a promise to pay dollars in the future. If the dollar is dying, those bonds are worthless certificates of confiscation. The shift to a gold standard wipes out the value of paper assets. If you do not hold physical metal, your retirement plan is a hallucination. You must become your own central bank. You must hold the collateral, not the promise. The media will call this a crisis. They will say capitalism has failed. They are wrong. Crony capitalism has failed. Fiat socialism has failed. What is emerging is honest capitalism based on sound money. The transition will be chaotic, violent, and scary. But on the other side of this collapse is a more stable, just, and prosperous world for those who prepared. Look at the tech companies. Why are billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg building bunkers? Why are tech companies buying land? They know the digital economy is a layer built on top of the physical economy. When the money breaks, the digital layer evaporates. They are securing physical assets because they know that in a reset, ownership of the physical world is the only thing that matters. They're going back to basics. You should too. The illusion of wealth in the stock market is about to shatter. The Dow Jones might be at 40,000, but priced in gold, it is crashing. You are getting more dollars, but buying less house, less food, less energy. This is the money illusion. The return of the gold standard strips away this illusion. It forces us to confront the reality of our poverty. It is a harsh mirror, but it tells the truth. We must also consider the moral dimension. Fiat money allows governments to steal from the poor via inflation to pay for the wars of the rich. It is a system of slavery. Gold is honest. It cannot be printed. It cannot be debased. A return to the gold standard is a return to moral money. It rewards savers and punishes spenders. It aligns economic incentives with natural law. It is the restoration of sanity. The timeline is accelerating, and what we thought would take a decade is happening in months. The de-dollarization trend has gone vertical. Countries are dumping treasuries at a record pace. The Fed has lost control. They can print money, but they cannot print confidence. Once confidence is lost, it never returns. The dollar has entered the graveyard of currencies. Action plan. Get out of debt. Debt is a short position on the currency, which is good in inflation, but in a reset, the terms of the debt can change. Own tangible assets. Food, water, energy, gold, silver. Build skills that are valuable in a local economy. The global supply chain is breaking down along with the currency. You need to be able to survive without Amazon and Walmart. The psychological shock will be severe. Americans believe they are rich because they have high credit limits. When the credit card stops working, they will realize they are poor. This cognitive dissonance will lead to social unrest. Prepare for a period of anger and confusion as the population realizes they have been robbed by their own leaders. This is the end of the American empire, but not the end of America. Empires die when their currency dies, but nations can be reborn. The return to the gold standard is an opportunity to rebuild on a solid foundation. It is a chance to clear the rot and start over. It is a painful surgery, but it is the only way to save the patient. The gold standard has returned. The dollar is dead. Long live gold. The king of money has returned to his throne. Make sure you are standing in his court when he distributes the wealth, not outside the castle walls holding a bag of worthless paper. Here is a radical thought. The income tax is only necessary because we have a fiat currency. In the 19th century, under the gold standard, there was no income tax in America. The government was small and funded by tariffs. The return of the gold standard forces the government to shrink. It starves the beast. If they can't print money, they can't afford a bloated bureaucracy. This transition might eventually lead to the abolition of the IRS as we know it. A hard money system is a low tax system by necessity. The U.S. Treasury holds over 8,000 tons of gold, allegedly. Currently, it is valued on their books at $40.22 per ounce. This is a joke. In a reset, the Treasury can revalue this gold to market price, say $20,000 per ounce. This instantly creates trillions of dollars of equity on the government's balance sheet, allowing them to pay off debt without default. This stroke of the pen is the most likely mechanism for the reset. It happens overnight. You wake up and gold is up 10,000%. Crypto investors believe Bitcoin is digital gold. In a gold standard world, Bitcoin faces its toughest test. Will governments ban it to protect their new gold-backed currencies? Or will Bitcoin serve as the high-speed rail for moving this new gold-backed value? We believe Bitcoin and gold will coexist as the twin pillars of the new system. One analog, one digital. Both are enemies of the fiat dollar. Diversification into both is the ultimate hedge. When the currency is revalued against gold, the cost of imported goods will skyrocket. Electronics, clothes, and coffee will become luxury items. This will trigger social unrest. People will riot over the price of bread. The government will likely respond with price controls and rationing, which will lead to shortages. The gold standard brings long-term stability, but the transition period is pure chaos. You need to be prepared for the streets, not just the markets. The too-big-to-fail banks cannot survive in a hard money world. They are too leveraged. We will see the return of small, local, community banks that actually hold reserves. These banks will know their customers and lend based on real collateral, not credit scores. The financial system will decentralize. The power of Wall Street will be broken and returned to Main Street. Imagine a debit card that is linked directly to your gold holdings. You swipe it, and it sells a milligram of gold to pay for your coffee. This technology already exists, like Kinesis or Glint. In the new system, this will be the norm. You will spend gold instantly. The currency is just the transmission mechanism. The gold is the store of value. We are moving to a post-fiat world where technology makes using gold as easy as using Venmo. Fiat money funds endless wars. Governments can print money to buy bombs without taxing the citizens. Under a gold standard, war is expensive. You have to pay in gold. This makes long, drawn-out conflicts impossible. The return of sound money is the greatest force for peace. Nations will be forced to trade rather than invade. The death of the dollar might mean the birth of a more peaceful world. There's a biblical concept called the Jubilee, a forgiveness of all debts. As the fiat system collapses, the debts denominated in that currency become worthless. If the dollar goes to zero, your mortgage, which is in dollars, effectively goes to zero. The banks know this. They will try to rewrite the contracts to index your debt to inflation or gold. Do not sign the new contract. Let the inflation wipe out your debt. It is the borrower's paradise and the lender's nightmare. Living under inflation causes anxiety. You are always running on a treadmill, trying to keep up with rising prices. Sound money brings psychological peace. You know that your savings are safe. You know that your labor is stored in a battery that doesn't leak. The return of the gold standard will heal the collective psyche of the nation. It restores the link between effort and reward. It brings back the dignity of work. The gold standard is not just a monetary system. It is a civilization standard. It represents truth, honesty, and limits. The experiment of the last 50 years, the experiment of unlimited greed and printing, has failed. Nature is correcting the imbalance. The dollar is dead because it was a lie. Gold is alive because it is the truth. The king has returned. Long live the king.
There simply isn't enough gold or silver in the world to replace these digits and pieces of paper, which is the foundational problem with a system that depends only on physical gold and silver. It's important to understand that there are two systems involved here. The financial system, which runs on stocks, bonds, promissory notes, and other forms of commercial paper. And the monetary system, which has always run on gold and silver and similar physical assets. For many years, Americans and other people around the world have had little to no access to actual monetary markets because the Cretans who commandeered our government back in 1860s had to operate on credit. So credit was all they cared about, and the fractional reserve system increased credit. It also, by definition, created far more credit than could be supported based on any specific asset used as the chattel backing all this extra credit. What happens when the actual owners of both the asset and the credit shows up and say, we didn't authorize any of this, and those who did don't have a contract with us allowing them to do this? The so-called national debts only appeared to exist because of bad bookkeeping and constructive fraud. Any debts that you thought you owed are equally bogus. We have recognized that the living people are the actual owners of all physical assets, and all credit derived from those physical assets too. That makes you all very well off. And it means that a lot of people are going to jail on a worldwide basis. So long as you are not one of them, you have nothing to fear. The reason that the crazy paper dollar system was adopted in the first place is that there isn't a sufficient supply of gold or silver to meet the currency demand posed by 8 billion people. and millions of active commercial corporations. Gold and silver-based monetary systems are inelastic, which leads to craziness of its own. Imagine a little gold coin purportedly being worth $2 million. That's a structural lie in its own right, a figment of value created by the limited supply parameters of silver and gold commodities, poised against the unlimited demand pressure of the world economy. The same problem applies to all the physical commodity-based monetary systems. Even if you set up a basket of commodities to back a currency, the fundamental inelasticity and limited supply of the chosen commodities relative to the need for a medium of exchange would cause the same problem. Even the paper money system was straining to keep up. That's why all the banks have been relentlessly pushing for digital currencies. Put simply, the banks are running out of products to sell. Money based on precious metals is inelastic. Even as BRICS steps into this familiar slippery slope, they are at 1-to-8 demand ratio. Financial instruments representing monetized physical and non-physical assets of all kinds are relatively elastic and support a much larger world economy, but they are finite too. The whole world is poised on the knife edge of this dilemma, a choice between hyperinflation of the fiat currencies or hyperdeflation of the precious metal-based currencies. And nobody outside top banks and think tanks seems to realize that neither of these systems is going to work. It's not a matter of which money is good and which money is bad. According to the perspective of our fiduciary, the entire concept of money is built on a delusion induced by behavioral modification patterning. Once everyone realizes that money is a false paradigm, the search for truth becomes inevitable. We have found a means to transition everyone and float this boat, but ultimately, the entire concept of money is the problem that we will have to face. To meet these needs and demands of 8 billion people requires a financial system component, and there is one ready and at hand called prepaid credit. The fractional reserve system first collapsed in the 1930s, less than 2 decades after it was allowed. Following the 1929 crash, the U.S. Congress passed laws that prohibited the banks from putting their depositors' money at risk and prevented them from acting as investment banks. Glass-Steagall and other Depression-era legislation held the line so that the banks could not put their depositors' actual physical assets at risk, but they found ways to create credit based on those assets, and they continued to put their depositors' credit at risk. Over the years, the protection offered by these Depression-era laws weakened. The banks created new kinds of financial instruments, cooked up new securities, and evaded the laws by acting as security brokerages instead of banks, without telling their customers, of course. By 2016, what most of us thought of as private bank accounts in small-town local banks had been redefined yet again, and deposits made into these accounts became property of the bank. Instead of the banks being liable for returning the deposits and keeping them safe, and instead of entering new deposits as bank trust liabilities, the banks began entering new deposits as bank property and bank assets. Of course, they never told you, Joe Average Depositor, about any of these convenient, unlawful conversion activities. And you didn't object. You were purportedly agreeing with it voluntarily. If you did object, they simply debanked you, closed your account, took any remaining digits in your account, and left the impression that you were doing something shady to deserve this. In 2023, all local bank accounts were converted into FedNow accounts, so that even though the local bank continued to service your accounts, the actual accounts and all deposits were held as assets belonging to the Federal Reserve. They didn't tell you anything about this either, except in tiny print in obscure legalese language, buried in the back of a colorful brochure about modern banking and their dedication to serving you. The key piece of fraud which led to all this other fraud and criminality was always the fractional reserve banking system. And this key piece was never dismantled. Millions of people need to wake up. It happened on January 12, 2025. The U.S. Congress passed legislation that appears to allow the central banks to seize savings and checking accounts. And they can do it very easily using the conversion of all the private bank accounts to Fed Now accounts that already took place in January of 2023. Very fast changes in law occurred literally overnight, allowing the banks to bail in to save the banks. Then they offer you a central bank digital token as the only consideration in exchange for your savings. Everything that you have in banks is eligible for seizure, and the only remedy or restitution available will be the issuance of central bank digital tokens. What did that 1968 Credit River decision case teach us about the consideration that the Federal Reserve banks bring to the table? They provide zero consideration. Let me remind you, America, don't take the bait. The quantum financial system, or QFS system, is their replacement for the Federal Reserve System. They are advertising for people to hurry up and establish their accounts in the QFS system so that you will be locked down and dependent on them and their digital imaginary money. And things will only get worse if we don't all see through this and expose them and their QFS for what it is. The fact is that we, the living people, own every Federal Reserve note either printed as a paper bill or entered into a ledger as money of account. And we have paid for those Federal Reserve notes many, many, many times over, so that the actual debt that these miscreants owe us is even greater than the bank balance sheets can show. The bait is an offer to wipe away all of your debt and have a jubilee, but don't fall for it. Allow our fiduciary to explain to you so that you don't be fooled by the great white hope they call the QFS. They owe us more than just wiping away the debt. And we'd be a fool to accept $1.1 million worth of more IOUs, i.e. Federal Reserve notes per household. You know how the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Now listen to what they really owe us.
Hi, kids. It's my job to teach you how we accrued a great deal of national credit, why the national debt does not exist, in fact, and how all of this should have gone and didn't. So we're going to try to do that quickly and simply, and I'm going to use a whole bunch of little props here to help you along. One of the props is this. This is a $20 bill. It is a debt note. It's an IOU that has been issued by the Federal Reserve System. Now, what the Federal Reserve System does is it keeps track of all of the funds like this that are issued into the economy. It keeps a very strict accounting and serial notes and everything else for every one of these cash debt notes that are issued into the economy. And the banks keep an equally strict accounting of every quote-unquote dollar that is issued as quote-unquote money of account into the economy. Well, money of account is just an accounting version of this. They are again issuing a debt, okay? And they keep real good track of the debt. And that's how you get a national debt. The national debt is the sum total of all the arrears of all of the notes that are floating around out there, either as money of account or as actual printed cash notes like this. But okay, you've got this humongous national debt here, which also includes interest payments on the national debt. All right, we're going to see why that's all bogus. But here you have your debt note, your IOU. Let's see what happens. It gets spent into the economy as the paycheck of Nancy Crawford, who works for the Department of Labor. Yeah? Okay, so she's got her $20. She's going to go out for lunch. She goes in, she orders a cheeseburger, fries, a couple of Cokes, maybe a milkshake. At the end, she goes to this guy who gave her the cheeseburger, the fries, the milkshake, and the malt, and she gives him this, her IOU. And he accepted because it's legal tender. All right, so he's forced to accept this. This is her IOU, and he's accepting it. Well, she goes back to lunch, from lunch, I should say. And, he puts it in his cash register. And here comes another customer. Well, he buys lunch for himself and his family. And in the process, this guy gives him the original $20 IOU as change. Okay? So, now this fellow walks down the street and he goes to a spice shop and he sees this jar of curry paste that he just has to have. And so, once again, he gets the curry paste and he passes the note. Okay? We take this for granted. It happens in front of us all the time, all the days of our lives, and we never really think about it, do we? But this is the same IOU, and now it's managed to extract cheeseburger, fries, Coke, a frosty fountain drink, and the curry paste. And it's still in circulation. All right, so now we have it back again. And he's going to go and he's going to pick up a gift for his teenage daughter, who just loves Chuck-a-cherries. So he gets some Chuck-a-cherries. And once again, he gives the note, the IOU, to the guy who sold him the Chuck-a-cherries. Once again, the guy puts it in his cash register and waits for another customer to come in. And she just has to have this beautiful big bottle of fancy perfume. All right? And so she gives her $20 to the guy who's selling her the perfume. Okay. All right. What happens? It's sitting in a cash register. This guy comes in. He spends $50. He gives the $50 to the fella here, and he gets the 20 back as change. There it goes again. Well, he decides he's going to surprise his wife and buy some Christmas decorations and candles and stuff. So he buys this balsam pine Christmas candle. All right? Are you beginning to get this? It's still the same IOU. It's the very same IOU for $20, the same amount, the same IOU, and it has now cycled through the economy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and it has each time extracted actual goods, physical goods, in exchange. So you have a $20 debt, and you've got a candle, a bottle of perfume, a large quantity of curry paste. You've got some cherries. You've got a cheeseburger and fries and Coke and a fountain drink. You have all these goods in exchange for just this one debt note, this one IOU. So this one debt note has extracted what? $100 worth of goods, actual physical goods, in exchange for a debt of $20. Now, we just followed that through 5 different transactions. And you have to ask yourself, how many transactions could a bill like this go through in its lifetime? 1,000? 10,000? I'm sure that we can figure out an average number of exchanges that a bill like this goes through before it crumples up and gets thrown away and burned, all right? But the entire time that it is alive and circulating in the economy, it is accruing exactly $20 worth of debt, and it's accruing all of these goods and services in exchange. So this is how people have paid with real debt. They've paid with real credit, with real things, with real physical goods and services. And that's how they have accrued a gigantic national credit that is already paid for in goods and services. And that's why the accounting of the national debt is seriously messed up and not correct. Okay, if this system had been working the way that it would, that it normally should, as a zero-sum credit transaction system, the moment that this was exchanged, the very first time, there should have been an exchange in which the debt canceled out against the credit, and both were gone. They were no more. Poof. They zeroed out. The debt created the credit created the debt. Boom. You had lunch. Good for you. Okay? There's no debt on either side here because what? It's a zero-sum transaction system. All right, so what didn't happen? That didn't happen. There was no accounting on both sides. They separated it out into 2 separate account books. They killed the ledger. There was no ongoing accounting. There was no balancing of the books. So that what you got was this gigantic national debt that was tracked, and this even far more humongous national credit that was never accounted for. And now we do have this little problem. Because as you've already observed directly, within the first couple of transactions, at most, you have wiped out the debt because you've already given more than $20 worth of goods and services, right? So there is no more national debt. In fact, it's paid for, right? However, because there's no accounting, there's no balancing of the books, this continues to sit there and appear to be a debt, along with all the money of account from all the loans, you understand. That's how you get 37 trillion, right? But it appears to sit there, and then somebody says, oh, well, we have to get payment on the debt. We have to get bursary on the debt. Somebody has to pay us interest for sitting on all this debt, right? So even though this debt has been paid and doesn't actually exist, they're charging you interest on it. And it's not small interest, it's big interest. They're charging you interest on a $37 trillion debt that by definition was paid off long ago and doesn't exist. Okay, so there is no national debt. It was paid off within the first couple of rounds of the economic system. And there is no interest owed on said national debt. I mean, if you really wanted to get down and scrape for it, you might be able to argue that there was an ephemeral debt that lasted, 72 hours after the release of the credit? Maybe 2 months on a house loan? It's silly. It's ridiculous. It was never meant to be that way. It was meant to be zeroed out with every transaction. But it wasn't. And since it wasn't, what we can safely say is there is no national debt. There should be no appreciable interest payable on that debt. And instead, what you really are left with is this humongous pile of goods and services that have been paid out that is maybe 1,000, 2,000 times, maybe 3,000 times the national debt that's already been paid out as goods and services and never actually been paid for? That's the national credit. That's why people have large quantities of prepaid credit that is owed to them. So, what do? We still have these floating around in the economy causing trouble, right? So when we have someone come in and they exercise their $50 worth of prepaid credit, what do? We take this guy out of the system. We take this bill or we take the money of credit, we take $50 off the national debt, boom, and we just get rid of it. It's automatically accounted for finally. And once that whole thing is done, and we are done with this, we're done with the quote-unquote national debt finally being accounted for, then we have nothing left over but still an incredibly large pile of prepaid credit that can be used as the new currency in the commercial system. Because remember, commerce is air jurisdiction. It's a matter of mental and thought energy. It's a matter of debts and credits. It's a matter of paper. For a better word, it's paper. Whereas we live in the real world, and for us, it's the new bottle of perfume. It's the cherries. It's that cheeseburger with fries. And now you can see how we wound up with both a humongous national debt, how we wound up paying bursary interest on a national debt that really didn't exist, and how we wound up with an incredible pile of prepaid credit owed to the consumers. And that is how we propose to return the credit that's owed to the consumers and get rid of the national debt and start a whole new accounting system that will reflect reality and not create problems for living people.
And that's the good news. They owe us not only the hard assets they have been confiscating since 1898, our gold, our silver, our land, but they also owe us our credit that has been accruing since we have been passing those Federal Reserve notes from hand to hand. Our fiduciary is warning you, America and the world. Britain is behind this. The government of Westminster, that is the inner city of London, is behind this. To some extent, the Vatican system is behind this. They are deliberately crashing the Federal Reserve because the lies and illegal processes underlying it became too obvious and too much of a liability. We own the debt of the Federal Reserve, and we own the QFS as successors of the Federal Reserve. And we are calling for them to be arrested for criminal malfeasance, breach of trust, fraud, conspiracy against the constitutions, inland piracy, unlawful conversion, and international bank fraud. All assets being shifted to the QFS are our purloined assets. Yes, we know all the faithful QAnons and alt news readers among us have been told and firmly believe that the so-called QFS, or quantum financial system, is the brainchild of the white hat military and Donald J. Trump. But not true. The patent was filed by the U.S. Postal Service and later assigned to the United States Postal Service, all capital letters, and from there assigned to the Salesforce Incorporated. Let me show you. Patent number US 12354-089B2. Database System Public Trust Ledger. Multi-owner token architecture. Applicant, Salesforce Inc. Assignee, Salesforce Inc. Now, who is Salesforce Inc.? Salesforce Inc. is actually owned by a consortium of banks and institutional owners. And if it were ever a white hat operation, it's not anymore. And who's at the top of that consortium bank list? Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and the usual lot of them. The list may say Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, but we learned in part 1, those are really mega corporation conglomerates that own each other. And we know how they do business, running their commodity rigging schemes on Wall Street stock market. Do you really want to keep them in control of your money? It's the same old crowd owning and controlling the QFS. And it's the same public-private relationship I presented to you in part 1. The commercial interest pays the government pays the military, and the military works to protect the government and the commercial interests. So it's no longer SWIFT, but QFS controlling the money transfer pipeline with the same players. Now, do you really think that these boards of corporate criminals of these commercial corporations have had a come to Jesus moment and vowed to walk the straight and narrow from here on out, spreading humanitarian aid all across the world to make restitution for all the criminal behavior that I exposed about them in part 1? Really? Let me take you to the QFS website and let's take a look at what the brand of dung they are actually selling to you now. Quantum financial system. Best way to bank and secure your finances with the QFS. Quantum ledger banking is a decentralized digital banking system specially designed by the Quantum Financial System in partnership with Nassara Jassara to bring a whole new system to the banking world with strongly backed digital assets and to ensure your finances are safe. Now, here they just told you there's a public-private partnership. You have the quantum financial system, which is the consortium of the same players, the mega corporations, in partnership with Nasara Jassara, which is the US military and the Territorial Congress. Deceitfully promoted as if it was the same legislation presented by Colonel Roy Riezinger. And when you were reading this, did you ask yourself the question, strongly backed digital assets? Backed by what? Strongly backed is awfully vague. Those are the questions that I asked. So I had to find on this page the description of what strongly backed was. So down here on the About Us page, or About Us section, it says, About Us. The quantum financial ledger represents a cutting-edge financial system designed to eliminate monopolies within the monetary system. To achieve this, it incorporates artificial intelligence and sophisticated computer programs with full support from financial institutions. Quantum financial services promise to revolutionize the banking industry, ushering in a new era. QDB will operate independently of government policies and will instead be secured by tangible assets such as gold, platinum, and oil, ensuring it's not reliant on mere paper currencies lacking evidentiary value. Wow. That sounds almost exactly what our banking system promotes to do. But there's only one critical point. Those assets belong to us, not the corporations. So first of all those assets in the QFS need to be shifted to the Global Family Bank without exception. They don't belong to the corporations. They belong to the living people of those nations that the US military and the commercial bankers purloined them from. Secondly, the Brits backing the QFS will try to tell you that they are the authors of this happy result, but they aren't. As usual, they were part of the problem and only saw the light when they had no other choice. They are still trying to chisel accolades and interests in the assets of living people, but you all have a simple way out of that trap. Move your assets to the Global Family Bank so that you and your assets are living securely on the land and soil of your own country. Even with BRICS and QFS bringing two new systems online, aside from them still controlling your purloined assets, the problem of monopolization of the funds transfer access remains. They will be able to pull all the same tricks as the SWIFT system, and probably more, with funds transfers and asset-based money and fiat financial instruments, both. And the only convincing function of the regulators will be to stand in line to be paid off. And then there's the politically motivated debanking, where the banks were allowed to just arbitrarily shut down accounts and keep the change. This is why we built the Blue Dot Bilateral Prosperity System, to serve living people and provide basic old-fashioned banking services under land law. We are here so that coercive monopolies aren't the only game in town. We gave up on waiting for the regulators to do their job. We stopped waiting for law enforcement to enforce their own laws. We realized that the people sitting in Congress didn't care about or serve the needs of the individual living people. So we took on that job and created our own banking solution. For thousands of years, banks have been founded on lies and idolatry and self-interest. We have chartered our own bank, founded on the idea that money should serve humanity instead of humanity serving money. Watch this 30-minute video clip of history being made and a little history being told of when our fiduciary canceled 2 bearer bonds to fund the first of its kind, our own new blue dot bilateral banking system, our own American chartered trade bank called Global Family International Trade Bank, and its subsidiary, the Global Family Bank of Commerce. Let's watch and learn.
Now we get down to today and the money issues. We find that in 1934, a number of maneuvers, let's call them maneuvers, were made by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States of America, Incorporated, which is one of the subcontractors, a British Territorial subcontractor to be exact. FDR did a number of things that, from any rational viewpoint, were extremely criminal. I know that's going to be a disappointment to many people who idolized this man, but the things that he did to our country were criminal. For starters, he enslaved the municipal population by impersonating people as things and issuing clearinghouse certificates, birth certificates, against them and against their resources and assets. This was somewhat announced during his first inaugural address, which is couched in very religious terms. Take a look at the text of his first inaugural address, and you will see where he actually says that this is what's going on. He is selling a purported interest in living people, the citizenry of the municipality, and he's issuing clearinghouse certificates against them, against their good name. This was the beginning and the backdrop for a more generalized process of registration, false registration, that did the same thing to millions of Americans. This birth registration process is a commercial process. Registration involves giving something up to whatever organization it's registered with. And you can now see that millions and millions of American babies have been misrepresented as municipal citizenry, slaves, owned by these corporations, and have had citizenship obligations conferred upon them using the same presumptions that FDR created then. So we now have the prospect of slavery being reintroduced into the modern world, where it's been outlawed since 1926. And you may ask how they got away with this. Well, when they impersonate people as citizens, they have created an office, a title, and the living man disappears behind this facade of a title. So they were actually, technically, legally, but not lawfully, attaching a title to each one of us, and they were then trading these titles and issuing these certificates against those names. This has created a situation in which living people have been plundered as corporations. And they're not corporations. They were never even made aware that any of this was going on behind their backs. Millions, billions of people have been defrauded by this evil system. And part of the evil was that they seized upon our gold and silver to pay their debts. So, in 1934, they issued gold bearer bonds. This began a practice that has continued through to the present day. They issued gold bearer bonds. The corporations, calling themselves the United States of America Incorporated, issued gold bearer bonds against our gold, the unincorporated United States of America. Now, it's our gold. It was always our gold. And they got away with taking it offshore and placing it in safekeeping by claiming a custodial interest, a trust interest, that in fact does not exist. You can read any one of the constitutions and see exactly what their duties are. It does not include taking our gold or our silver or putting it anywhere. They are not responsible for that. Now, they have taken leave of their senses as of 1934 and issued gold-bearer bonds against our gold assets, which they cashiered in the Philippines. The United States Navy has all the receipts. We have the receipts. We can show what they did. They took our gold, transported it to the Philippines for quote-unquote safekeeping, and then in 1934 they issued all these gold-bearer bonds against our gold resources in the Philippines. 152 quote-unquote baby boxes, which I will show you examples of, were issued. Each one contains a letter purporting to confer global immunity on the carrier and the receiver of these bonds. Each one contains 250 of the bearer bonds, and they are each for $100 million in 1934 terms. As bearer bonds, they can be cashed by the bearer against the Filipino government and the reserves held in the Philippines. However, that is not how they have used these bonds. What they've done is they have put them in banks as cash assets, as the equivalent of gold. And they have used them to underwrite the banks. They have used them to issue credit. And of course, under the fractional reserve banking system that they conveniently set up for themselves, they can issue 10 times the credit than the asset backing the credit. So you have one apple in the warehouse, and you've got 10 guys out there with a warehouse certificate for the same apple. Do I have to explain that this is a fraudulent system, that it is legalized gambling, and that it results in a completely untenable situation? Now we have a mess to clean up on a worldwide basis. And it has been created by our military, failing its duty to protect and serve, by our politicians, acting as criminals in office, by the ignorance of the people that have accepted this as if it were something that made sense, when in fact it does not, and never did. We all have a share of guilt here. Whether you were one of the perpetrators or you were one of the victims, it has to end. And it has to end here and now. So, we are in the process of cashing in a single gold bearer bond. We are the actual owners of the gold in the Philippines that this bearer bond is drawn against. We are going to cash it in. We are not going to use it for credit purposes. We are not going to leave it unmarked. We are going to cash in each and every coupon on the bond. It is going to be finalized at a specific time, on a specific day, for a specific value. And we are going to deposit it in our American chartered international trade bank. It is not owned or operated by the U.S. in any way, shape, or form. It is not subject to the U.S. It is not operated under private law. It's operated under public law, our public law. And it is operated under international law. We have chartered the Global Family International Trade Bank as an American institution. We have also chartered the Global Family Bank of Commerce. This is part of the Blue Dot banking system. It's designed to make banking honest again. It's designed to help clean up this ungodly mess. And it is intended to bring back standards of good business practice, fairness, and justice for everybody on the planet. This is not just an American problem, and it's not going to be just an American solution. At this point, the living people on this planet are owed trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, and so are our trust funds. Let me very briefly address this issue too. As part of their attempt to overcome the public and subjugate the employers as if we were the debtors of the employees, they have attempted to steal American common law trusts designed to operate in perpetuity and to do the same kind of identity substitution swindle that they've attempted to do with us individually and with our countries. They have just set up a shell company, a shell corporation with a similar name, and they have pretended that that shell corporation is the same as the actual trust. Let me give you an example. America was underwritten by the St. Germain Family Trust. I happen to know this because I'm a member of the St. Germain family. St. Germain left an incredible fortune to underwrite America and America's government forevermore. He believed in freedom. He believed in the principles of self-governance. And he and other family members placed their fortunes in the trust to underwrite America. That trust is an American common law trust which exists in perpetuity. The perpetrators of all this evil and criminality set up another trust, a statutory trust, named it the same thing, and pretended to have access and right to draw upon the resources of the St. Germain Family Trust. They pulled the same little dirty trick that they pulled on the United States of America. They pretended to incorporate it. But you cannot incorporate something that is unincorporated and which is settled in its law. The trust indentures themselves prevent this kind of activity if someone stands up and says, no, that's not the way it is. There is no association between the United States of America unincorporated and something foreign calling itself the United States of America incorporated. There is no association between the St. Germain Family Trust, which is unincorporated, and something calling itself the St. Germain Family Trust Incorporated. That other entity is just a shell. It's an empty shelf corporation with no assets of its own, and it only succeeds in accessing the assets when the bar associations fail their duty and allow this to take place. So, today we are going to cancel a portion of the debt that our employees and subcontractors owe us, and we are going to redeem a bearer bond for the full value of the gold, which is ours, in the Philippines. You're going to be here witnessing a little bit of history. When the United States of America unincorporated redeems value for our gold, in the process, that portion of debt that is owed by our subcontractors will be erased. It will reappear on the books of our newly chartered American banks. And from there, it will go back to be used by the people of this country as they are needed, as the funds are needed to support the actual public and the actual government. We all need to understand that this is literally our country. We are the government. And it is our responsibility to carefully watch what goes on so that these things never happen again. And so that there are no misunderstandings of who is who and what is what. And so that the bar associations and their members are kept in the straight and narrow and not allowed to pull these kinds of tricks again. All right, folks, we're going to take a little break here. And when we come back, we're going to create a little history. A 1934A. Two series, two original bonds. Here's the back of the second bond. I should have showed this as the back of the first bond, so take another look. Okay, that's the back of the first bond. And again, I'll repeat, this is the second bond. This is the back of the second bond. The 100 million bond is SC122071K11, box number K4577, space 3300-A. It's important for everyone to realize that both the gold and the credit belong to us, the living people, the Americans, whose gold was transferred to the Philippines by the U.S. Navy beginning in 1898. So the gold was transferred to the Philippines in the years prior to 1907 for the most part, with continuing shipments. This gold is claimed by the people of this country as our inheritance and asset. So when we are redeeming these bonds, we are actually forgiving a portion of the debt that the United States of America Corporation created by issuing the bonds in the first place against our assets. So on one hand, we're reducing the national debt, their national debt, at the same time that we are recouping our assets that are lawfully and legally ours, together with the credit that was issued against our assets. Now, we have looked at these bonds very carefully, and they do agree with our records. They do agree with the descriptions given. They are on the right paper. They are completely hallmarked. They are identifiable. We have every reason to believe from the provenance from which we received these, and their appearance, and their hallmarks, and their signatures, everything about these bonds appears to be genuine. So I am going to certify that they are genuine as fiduciary of the United States of America, unincorporated. We are going to cancel these bonds. And here to assist me in this is our bank, one of our bank directors for the Global Family International Trade Bank. Arturo, would you do the honors?
Yes, I will. Okay, that's one. Okay. Still being canceled.
As you can see, both of these bonds have been completely canceled. They have the bank stamp on every coupon.
Just settle it down here, so. Anyway,
This concludes the process by which the so-called national debt is canceled and by which the gold is repatriated to the actual owners, the American states and people, and our government and international jurisdiction, the United States of America, unincorporated. The gold value will now be transferred to the ledger of the Global Family International Trade Bank, which the American government has chartered. This is our gold going into our trade bank, and nobody on earth has any reason to object or to question or to raise any kind of a fluff at all about this. The appropriate offices that need to be notified are being notified. The Central Bank of the Philippines is being notified. The Department of the Federal Treasury is being notified. From their side, this means that they are being relieved of a portion of their debt. From our side, it means that we are recouping gold that is ours, that has belonged to us, and that has been endangered unnecessarily by our employees. We are not using this as a basis for issuing credit under the Federal Reserve policies, and we're not using this for the purposes of setting up credit, although credit may be issued. We're setting this up as the gold-backed value, and this is all we're doing at this point. We may elect to create credit from this. If we do, bear in mind that we not only are the owners of the assets, we are the owners of the credit that results from the assets. And now I wish to say that this has been a very long journey for our country. This has been a very long journey for our people. And we are grateful to be at peace. This is a step forward for all of humanity, because as the Americans get their mess cleaned up, we bring forward the information that everybody needs to get their mess cleaned up.
We are invoking the law of the land and soil and our ownership interests as living people, purported donors of all the public and private trusts. To that end, let me introduce you to our 528 Prosperity Vendor Network, founded on the 528 Hertz vibration of love. Let me introduce you to our American banking platform here. In our new banking system, we pair our member international trade banks, which trade in physical assets like gold and silver, with our land jurisdiction commercial banks, which deal in commercial paper like stocks, bonds, certificates, etc. We have the Global Family Bank of Commerce for sea jurisdiction and the Global Family Commercial Bank for land jurisdiction commerce. Now, this is a new innovation that has never been done before. We also created new institutions called prosperity unions for the purpose of distributing prepaid credit, which is owed to the living people worldwide. This system makes our American government fully economically functional on soil, land, sea, and in air. We have chartered this system and the individual pairs of banks in this system to work together synergistically and cooperatively on a worldwide basis. Our aim is to provide a comprehensive and transparent banking system that everyone has access to, everyone understands, and everyone can safely use. In the way that we have set this up, our international trade banks promote and expedite free trade, and our land jurisdiction commercial banks are subject to the law of the land. This is the way all our banks and banking institutions are supposed to be organized. But over the course of the past century, the commercial banks escaped the oversight of the international trade banks. As a result, commercial banks have had a free-for-all of unbridled criminality because they were left unaccountable to the public law. And that circumstance has cost everybody dearly on a worldwide basis. In concert with the banks, we have established the American Federation Treasury and our American Federation Sovereign Treasury account, which are open for business now. We also have established the United States of America unincorporated paymaster account so that we can pay federal workers who are eligible for rehire, including the members of the military. Additionally, we have also established our Federation Reserve and trust and underwriting accounts for the purpose of conducting our affairs in the realms of international and global business. In reinstituting the bilateral banking system, we are correcting the situation. Everyone worldwide is invited to join us in restoring the lawful banking system because as it stands, nobody is safe. Not the largest corporation, not the smallest savings accounts. It's time to change that. International trade banks are banks set up and set aside to serve living people. Commercial banks are set up to serve corporations, and specifically incorporated businesses. We stand under public law, so we don't have private regulations and private regulators to deal with. The rules are the rules, and everyone can read them. We have bank stewards to provide third-party oversight, and a bank ombudsman office to deal with the customer complaints. We deliberately keep everything super simple and service-oriented. No fine print, no legal jargon, no hidden costs or endangerments. All the banks in the system share the same charter requirements and the same one-page bank treaty. So whether you are in Bangor, Maine, or Lagos, Nigeria, you know what the bank charter and bank treaty says. Our bilateral system offers a third and profoundly different option for non-political, simple, old-fashioned banking services that are not controlled by nor allied with or in partnership with political cults nor incorporated surveillance states. BRICS, QFS, or global family. You choose. We have prepared this new clean high-tech banking system, of which we prefer to call a prosperity system, for you. So you can use your prepaid credit and your gold and silver to buy whatever you need. Our new prosperity system comes with a new monetary system as well. We have established our new gold-backed currency, the American Federation dollar, which has been issued as an e-currency and denominated as a gold-backed harmony coin, and will be issued as a gold asset-backed certificate for us to circulate as cash as well. The Federal Reserve notes, which were debt notes, are being replaced by American Heritage dollars, which are prepaid credit accessed through your prepaid prosperity card. Via the American Heritage dollars, you will see the release of the restitution payments. The American currencies issued by our American government are 1, the gold American Federation dollar, 2, the all-silver United States dollar and coinage still in circulation, and 3, the American Heritage dollar representing prepaid credit to the bearer for goods and services you already delivered. We are positioned on and have our own harmonized exchange platform, so we have everything we need. We have the personal account transfer capability to transact everyday purchases anywhere in the world. National debts are being erased. Usury charged on national debts are hereby declared odious debts. That is, debt created by some means of fraud that the victims are not aware of and do not benefit from. The corporations responsible for these long-standing fraud against living people are being dissolved, which unavoidably is going to cause a bit of chaos and misunderstanding. Our system is transparent and focused on returning economic and financial power to over 8 billion people, returning hard assets and credit that belongs to them, and bringing to a halt the arbitrary and coercive monopolization of the banking industry. Ours is different because it was created for living people and sovereign nations, meant to serve them in the correct jurisdiction, under the correct laws and limitations. Our bilateral prosperity system uses simple carriage accounting and transparent blockchain algorithms to transfer assets and credits. Simple as it is nonetheless state of the art and provides all the necessary and traditional banking services that people and businesses need, plus a few services that are brand new, never done before. The corporations that have been functioning as governments are bankrupt and will not have direct access to the new banking system. Each country's master account in the new system is established as an unincorporated international trade account. Commercial corporations are not eligible to have master accounts, but may access and interface via subsidiary commercial accounts, so long as they are in good standing. Each nation is encouraged to form its own sovereign international bank and join our bilateral prosperity network. Our bank treaties are transparent and public and provided to you as a template to use. When we investigated, we found that virtually all banking worldwide is being conducted in one foreign jurisdiction of law, maritime commerce, a jurisdiction that doesn't make sense for 90% of living people, as we are not engaged in maritime business and not knowingly acting as individual incorporated business enterprises, that is, franchises. This circumstance derives directly from the great fraud and the various legalistic tricks, like undisclosed registrations, unconscionable contracts, converting the political status of babies, unlawful conversion of living people into foreign corporate and incorporated persons, human trafficking, fraud, personage, and barratry, all serve to redefine people as things, as incorporated things. They were then eligible to participate in maritime commerce. And what better form of commerce from the British point of view than maritime commerce, which they controlled, and which was subject to Scotland's version of Roman civil law. It was not a mistake that millions of Americans, Brits, Germans, French, Italian, and people, even as far as Indonesia, Japan, and China, was redefined in this same exact way and was herded like so many animals into a foreign banking system under the control of a foreign and undisclosed law and foreign undisclosed hierarchy. The central banks we have today are maritime commercial banks that deal in fiat currencies issued by private banks and in military scrips, bonds, stocks, and similar instruments, collectively known as commercial paper. These forms of legal tender are not lawful money and are only used as currencies in the jurisdictions of the sea and the air, not the land and the soil. As such, commercial banks are the correct banks to use to translate and deposit and transfer all forms of legal tender. Americans have a special contract that allows us to denominate legal tender as lawful money. That is, Americans can force the commercial banks to count legal tender as if it was lawful money and treat it as such. We can also invoke a dollar-to-dollar exchange rate. These advantages allow us to redeem fiat currencies of all kinds as lawful money of all kinds, using the fiat USD to silver dollar exchange rate as the standard. So Americans can translate fiat euros or USD issues into lawful money and vice versa. This is the reason that the International Trade Bank Network Hub is organized under American auspices and under American public law. There is no other country that we know of that has retained its ability to translate fiat money into lawful money and lawful money into fiat. The actual Americans, not the US citizens, can provide a gateway for the rest of the world and back the prepaid credit and the treasury bonds as a cash value asset. We can translate lawful money into fiat credit notes and credit notes into lawful money. We can resolve the debt credit transactions via offset, thereby relieving corporate public debt. We can open up a viable escape route for the chaos that will predictably result once the so-called emergency commodity rigging stops. We all retain the ability to think, to act on our own behalf, to get organized to do so, and to show up in our lives, take responsibility, and take charge. Our bilateral prosperity system allows you to do exactly that, as each country has their own international bank and their own sovereign treasury account linked to the national, that is, soil jurisdiction banks. Each country and sovereign nation is enabled to provide both the banking services and the correct form of law and currency owed to living people. This is what our fiduciary calls upon every nation on this earth to do. Start solving the problems for yourselves. Begin by declaring yourselves to be living people, standing on the land and soil of your country and recording that fact. We have opened up our international land recording system so that nobody is left without the basic tools needed to record your claims. Then, next, open up your own national trade bank. All you need is 3 people adopting their proper political status, born on the land of your country, who knows their family lineage back to 1850 and know that their ancestors was living in that country at that time, willing to step forward and declare that they are living heirs of the land and soil where they stand, and willing to record that statement on the international land records. Beyond that, you will need 4 volunteer employees: a bank steward, a bank fiduciary, a bank comptroller, and a bank director. Get their names and numbers and a name for your national trade bank and your wholly owned commercial bank subsidiary that goes with it. For example, you might call it the Danish Restoration Bank, an international trade bank. And then its subsidiary, Danske, a wholly owned commercial bank. This bilateral banking system is what is supposed to be in place worldwide. The international trade banks all function under public law and as the owners of the commercial banks. They keep them in line. Without this oversight, the commercial banks are succumbed to criminality, as they have. We all need to do this because, as it stands, nobody is safe, not the corporations and not the living people either. So every country on earth and all the people on that portion of the land and soil should be highly motivated and encouraged, but also moving at breakneck speed to revamp your banking operations. Once the bank is named, staffed, and formed, it's time for the officials to sign a simple universal bank treaty that we will provide to you as a template to connect you all to the global family prosperity system and all the other member banks in our global network of international trade banks. And then guess what? You too will have access to prepaid credit cards that aren't welfare and aren't benefits, but are funds owed to you and to your parents and to your grandparents before you. These vendor cards will be available to discharge various kinds of debts. They will make the crucial difference in millions of lives. So, if you weren't motivated before, get motivated now. Part one was the bad news, that our financial system all across the world is criminal inside and out, and has been for 160 years because it's run by a deeply vested criminal cartel and they won't let go. Part two is the good news, that America and the world have a fiduciary who has been working on our behalf all this time without us even being aware of it, to recoup our stolen hard assets, our prepaid credit, and our birthright claims, and secured them in an unassailable trust. Then created a bilateral prosperity system for the 8 billion people on this earth to be the means to distribute all these assets back to every living man and woman, one by one, and to every nation in the world, so they too can recover, secure, and protect their own sovereign assets from these criminal fraud schemes of the Federal Reserve central banks and the federal United States government commercial franchises. Did you know any of this was going on behind your backs all these years, the good or the bad? Let me know. Put your comments and questions below, and I will see you next time on the Resurgence Pulse Report.